Hey everyone, it's Eileen, and I wanted to let you know it is that time of year, meaning the Resilience Room, which only opens 2, maybe 3 times a year, is officially open for new members. We're open this week only from Monday, July 28th through the end of Friday, August 1st. Because we only open our doors 2, maybe 3 times a year, I wanted to be sure you didn't miss this opportunity to join our amazing community. It really is a group of the most empathetic, supportive, amazing parents. Just yesterday, I had a current member reach out to me completely randomly over email to say this: I wanted to let you know I'm a member of the Resilience Room community and I am loving it. All of the courses are so helpful, and your parenting suggestions and methods are so what we need over here. That's in all caps. I've also been so impressed by your responsiveness. Thank you for this beautiful thing you've created and shared with so many. I share this feedback with you in case you need that little nudge or encouragement to come check out all that the Resilience Room has to offer and to see it for yourself. I know I am biased, but over the 6+ years that we've been in existence, I really feel like I've found this sweet spot, this perfect balance between educational support through our course room and our private podcast feed and the live workshops that I host each and every month, and then the community support element. And that's our Zoom meetups that happen multiple times per month. So if you've been thinking of joining, now is the time. Again, we're only open this week from Monday, July 28th through Friday, August 1st. You can join at go.eileendevine.com/resilience room. That's go.eileendevine.com/resilience room. Okay, now on to the episode. Finding ourselves with an empty fuel tank is something we all experience from time to time. So this concept itself is not unique to our kids with brain-based differences. But like so many of the things we talk about here on this podcast, what is different for your child and all kids who live with brains that work differently is the intensity and the frequency of the brain fatigue. They get on empty much, much faster. And when they do, the intensity of their behavioral symptoms that result are much more intense. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I want to begin this episode with a question. Have you ever wondered why your child can make it through the school day without any really problematic behaviors, maybe no problematic behaviors, and then they come home and it is like immediate meltdown, immediate explosive behavior, meltdowns, and the rest of the evening is like World War III in your home? Or maybe you found yourself completely baffled by the fact that when your child goes over to, say, their grandparents' house for the weekend, there are no issues. They were behaviorally totally fine. But the moment they get home, they go from 0 to 60. And it seems like that happens in a matter of seconds. Or maybe you have a child who begs you, they plead with you to sign them up for all the things, let them do all the activities, take them here and there. And so you do that, only to have them complain and resist and fight it when it's time to go, right? My guess is that you've experienced something that resembles at least one of those realities, if not all three. They are so, so common. And there's a reason why they're common experiences for parents of kids with neurobehavioral challenges. You've probably guessed why. It's what we talk about all the time on this podcast. It has to do with their brain working differently. These are just a few examples of how cognitive fatigue or brain fatigue shows up behaviorally in kids with brain-based differences. And understanding cognitive fatigue, it's really essential as a parent or a professional who supports kids with brains that work differently. And so that's what I wanted to be sure to talk about on today's episode. We're going to dedicate an entire episode to this very foundational and important topic. I want you to imagine for a moment that your brain has a cognitive fuel tank. And let's assume that you get a decent night's sleep. And I know that's not always the case for some of you, but let's just assume that on this particular day, you were able to get a good night's sleep. So you wake up in the morning, you have a full tank of cognitive fuel because your brain has been able to rest and recover all night long. And as you go throughout your day, every single cognitive task that's required of you throughout your day, and there's a lot of them, it requires a little bit of that cognitive fuel in your tank. So as you move through the day, you're getting lower and lower on cognitive fuel. Now, part of just living life is that sometimes we have days that are more stressful, or maybe they're busier, they're more hectic in some way. They require more of us than our typical days. And on those particular days, we may not have as much cognitive fuel left in our tank at the end of the day because more was required of our brain to make it through until the end. I'm confident that if we were to ask them, my husband or even my teenagers, they could tell you what that looks like for me behaviorally. My cognitive fuel tank, when it is on empty, that brain fatigue is reflected through behavioral symptoms like irritability or being shorter on patience or not feeling motivated to do those things that I know need to happen, right? All I want to do is lay on the couch and maybe scroll social media. Finding ourselves with an empty fuel tank is something we all experience from time to time. So this concept itself is not unique to our kids with brain-based differences. But like so many of the things we talk about here on this podcast, what is different for your child and all kids who live with brains that work differently is the intensity and the frequency of the brain fatigue. They get on empty much, much faster. And when they do, the intensity of their behavioral symptoms that result are much more intense. When someone is living with a brain that works differently, what that means is that seemingly simple tasks and expectations are incredibly difficult for them because they just don't have the cognitive skills yet to be able to complete that task or to meet that expectation. This also means that their brain is working much, much harder than anyone else around them just to survive their day. That is why they find themselves on empty so quickly and so often. On top of that, we know that a very common symptom for kids with brain-based differences is that they don't have the ability to transition into sleep or stay asleep consistently, not without a lot of support, a lot of accommodations, adding to the brain fatigue. Right? Because when we are asleep is when our brain truly has the ability to recover and rest. And so if we're not sleeping, if we're not getting consistent sleep, then that brain doesn't have that opportunity to rest and recover. And then on top of that, many kids with differences, brain-based differences, experience difficulty with eating as much as you as their parents would like them to maybe it's because of sensory issues, or maybe it's because they don't experience the hunger cues in the way that you and I do. So they go a whole day without eating, for example. These are just a few of the other compounding factors that result in less cognitive fuel in their tank throughout the day. Brains that are working harder need more food to fuel their brain. So whereas you and I could navigate the tasks, the expectations that are in front of us, and still have a little cognitive fuel to spare at the end of the day, many of our kids are on empty, say midday, because they have already used everything in that cognitive fuel tank just to make it through their morning. This is why your child can do well during the day at school, but they fall apart with big behaviors when they get home. Sometimes it's as immediate as when they get in the car, right after pickup. They are so resilient because they have survived that day. They've been able to navigate the tasks, the expectations of that environment, barely keeping their head above water, using up all of their cognitive fuel that they have available. And that also means they come home to you on empty. You've heard me say that kids who do fairly well at school, where their differences are more invisible, that they are at highest risk for being misunderstood. They're the most vulnerable, in my opinion. This is especially true when we think about this part of their experience. These are the kids who are really struggling behaviorally at home, but are not yet a behavioral issue at school. So the school, they don't see any problem, right? They don't think there's any issues that need to be addressed. They don't see a need for accommodations because those behaviors aren't there in that environment yet, right? So there's no relief provided to that child in terms of supporting their lagging cognitive skills. They're really struggling all day long. They use every ounce of their cognitive fuel just to make it through that day. But again, they come home, maybe you as the parent ask them to, take off their shoes and hang up their backpack, and bam, it's explosive, immediate behavior. Over that simple request, they have nothing left in their cognitive fuel tank, even for this very simple request. I know when they come home to you on empty, I know that's really, really awful. Those behavioral symptoms are incredibly difficult and draining. I've talked to so many parents about what that looks like in their home, and so I'm sending you so much compassion if that's a part of your regular pattern with your child right now. What I really want you to hear is that those behavioral symptoms, that is the reflection of their empty cognitive fuel tank. That same pattern that we're talking about, it plays out in other situations and environments, like, as I mentioned before, going to the grandparents' house for the weekend. I'm just using school as one example because it is so common. But I know in all of these cases, people begin to tell you that the reason your child is falling apart at home and not in these other places is because you are doing something wrong. Like maybe you need to be more firm with her. Maybe you need to be more strict with her at home. Maybe you need to have better boundaries. So it's this awful blame game that just piles up the shame for the parent. It offers little to nothing in the way of answers for that parent regarding the best way to help their child settle. I want to talk briefly about another sneaky way that brain fatigue can show up. It can have this slow build at times, this cumulative effect where it reaches its peak and it catches a parent off guard. So I usually hear about this particular pattern happening from parents around busy seasons, say a holiday season where there's a lot of extracurricular activities and family gatherings, that over the course of that week or two, it just becomes too much. And the cumulative effect of the cognitive fatigue reaches its breaking point with that child, and they have to spend sometimes days recovering from this. It can also be really confusing for a parent when their child wants to do all the things, like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. They want to participate in multiple activities or sports. Maybe they're super social, so they want to hang out with friends all the time. And the parent really wants to make this happen for their child. But when it's set in motion, it's just too much. It's just too much for that child. Their brain has no time to rest, no time to recover within that busy schedule, and they start to have behavioral symptoms that look like defiance, disrespect, refusal. Let's remember that those activities require relational cognitive skills from that child, the social skills pieces. So it's a really, really heavy load, even if it's not academic based, right? Not an academic environment. So all of those behavioral symptoms, the defiance, the disrespect, the refusal, all of that is a reflection of cognitive fatigue and an empty fuel tank. So, with all of that being said, as you're considering your child's specific lagging cognitive skills, I want to really encourage you to remember that cognitive fatigue, it's always at play. It's this additional layer to the equation that I just want you to be aware of and be thinking about, because proactive accommodations for this aspect of their differences or disabilities can really make a difference, right? And prevent against those behavioral symptoms. And the accommodations for brain fatigue are pretty simple on the surface, but they can get tricky to implement at times. So I want to talk a little bit about that, the accommodations piece. The main overarching accommodation for brain fatigue is to allow time for the brain to rest and recover. So if you have a busy weekend, then you'd want to think proactively about allowing a day or however much time for your child to recover from that busy weekend versus just charging into a new school week, right? Or maybe you have to weed out some of those activities for that busy weekend so that they don't end up on empty when it's all said and done. A really generous and often necessary accommodation for many of our kids is to treat the evening time as brain rest and recovery time. So that's going to look different in every home, but some examples of that would be maybe talking to the school about accommodations regarding homework load, or even the removal of homework altogether. I know that's probably going to sound crazy to some of you, but it's a really appropriate accommodation for so many of our kids living with brain-based differences. They just do not have the stamina and the cognitive fuel to do homework after a long, full day of school. Or maybe it means reducing expectations that you have for them around the house, like the chores that they do during the week. That can be a big values clash for many parents. It's this feeling as though you need to be sure your kids know it's important for them to help out around the house and contribute to the household throughout the week. And I totally get that. I agree with you. I think we'd all agree that teaching responsibility, contributing to the family, that is a wonderful family value to instill. But when we think about it through a brain first lens and we consider the empty fuel tank, the empty cognitive fuel tank, my encouragement to you would be to think about how can you instill this value while still keeping in mind cognitive fatigue. Is there maybe a better time during the week, like a weekend day, to help your child through these responsibilities, a time when they have more cognitive fuel in their tank? Or deciding what is my highest priority, one highest priority when it comes to a chore, for example. Instead of multiple chores throughout the week, it's just one that you've adjusted your expectations so that their brain has time to recover. Another accommodation for brain fatigue, empty fuel tank, is to prioritize food and hydration. So our brain is only 2% of our body weight, but consumes a disproportionately large amount of calories, around 20% of the body's total energy expenditure. So because your child's brain is working even harder than a neurotypical child's brain, it needs more calories to function. So prioritizing food and hydration. I know that is easier said than done. And finally, one of the most effective accommodations to, prevent against cognitive fatigue and an empty fuel tank is to proactively put in accommodations where your child appears to be doing okay, but based on the behavioral symptoms that you see later in the day, you can assume that they are, again, working harder than anyone else in that environment, barely surviving in some cases. And if you put in accommodations proactively in that same environment, they won't be zapped of their cognitive fuel so quickly. And what that means is they won't end up on empty midday, right? They won't come home to you, for example, from school on empty and have so many behavioral symptoms. I know this can sometimes be a hard sell for, say this example of school, your child's teacher who doesn't see the behavioral symptoms. They don't see what the issue is. They don't see the need for accommodations. But I would encourage you to advocate for it anyways, and to approach that in the most collaborative way you can, of course, because what will inevitably happen This is a very common, a very typical pattern that I see all the time, is that your child won't be able to survive that environment and keep those behavioral symptoms at bay forever. The cognitive fatigue, it will build day after day, week after week, month after month, and then they won't be able to manage as well as they had been because their brain is tired and they will be on empty sooner. And so there will be behavioral symptoms that start to creep up and start to become a problem. So seeing this for what it is now and being able to proactively put plans, accommodations in place, that can prevent that pattern of escalating behaviors over time. You can prevent that from happening. Alrighty, I hope this episode has been helpful to you as you work so hard to support your complex child, your teen. It is, again, foundational to our understanding of them. And so having it be this overlay, this additional layer that you're always considering, I think will be really helpful to you in terms of understanding the patterns of behavioral challenges and how to proactively prevent against the brain fatigue to reduce the intensity of those behaviors. Before I say goodbye, I want to tell you about a free resource I have for you that is specific to this topic. And it is a free downloadable infographic that explains this aspect of your child's neurobehavioral condition. I would encourage you to download it, maybe print it out, hang it somewhere as a reminder for yourself that this is always at play for your child. And I'd also consider making additional copies to give to the other adults in your child's life who support them on a regular basis. I think that could be really helpful to them as well in terms of understanding your child. So you can find that free infographic at go.eileendevine.com/running empty. Again, that's go.eileendevine.com/running empty. And I will also be sure to link to it in the show notes. Thanks as always for listening. And until next time, take care. Before I say goodbye, I wanted to be sure to let you know that this isn't the only way that we can stay in touch. Every week, I pop into the inbox of thousands of other parents just like you with a short note that's focused on various aspects of this unique parenting experience. If that sounds like something that would be helpful to you, you can join my email list by going to my website, eileendevine.com.